Hello, and welcome to No Place Like Home with Mike and Megan Norp, where we believe the center of the universe is your home, and our home, and every other home on the planet. On this podcast, we talk about anything related to that. Homeschooling, parenting, home decorating, gardening, as long as it has to do with being home. So today is our first episode visually recording. You guys let us know
and recording it here too.
Yeah. We always have our podcast on our No Place Like Home podcast, and those are available anywhere you listen to podcasts. But now, if you're watching this visually, it's on our channel too.
Yeah, at least part of it is.
So
I don't know if we'll do the whole thing.
Yeah, you guys let us know in the comments that are watching this, and maybe you can send us a message if you're listening to this. Though I don't know if this will be part of the listening part. If you would like the whole podcast visually, all in one big hour-long chunk, or if we were planning on breaking it down into kind of smaller chunks.
Yeah, we'll see. On today's podcast, we're going to talk about how to argue
with your kids and
with each other. So we're recording this. So we've relocated down to the library area of our house. That makes it sound like a really big house.
It is huge.
It's just
I can't show it to you right now, but this is a really big room we're in.
This is just like the little sitting room area. I don't even know what this is.
That we
call
keep
it
our
the library.
Books in. Because it just makes it seem fancy or special to call it the library.
Yeah, it sounds better. We should put a plaque up that says library somewhere on it.
Welcome to the library.
Right. After you walk in the front door. But that means that there are probably going to be some background noises, so just be prepared for that. This is our house, and there's still some kids wandering around. I think Asher is.
Yeah, because earlier when we were just testing the sound, we could hear the plink of every drop of ice cube that he put in his glass. So.
In the kitchen way over there.
Yeah.
So.
Which is so far away, because once again,
yeah, it's amazing how sensitive these microphones are. They're really, really nice microphones. So.
Yeah, we've been wanting to record it visually for a while, but it was in our bedroom with our bed behind us, and that was a little much for us.
Yeah, we couldn't make that work. So we've moved down here. We'll see how this goes.
So last week's podcast, if you listened to that episode, we talked about how to discipline your children, and there's obviously so much to unpack there, and so we were happy to get some messages from a few of you. Actually, all the messages were nice.
Yeah.
Maybe just the haters haven't heard that episode yet. But we did say some very direct things about discipline and having authority and respect in your home. And we got a really great message from Megan. And I actually asked if I could read it here, and she said we could.
Awesome.
And she, there's a lot of, you can't cover all of one topic in an hour or two.
Uh-huh.
It's kind of a lifetime, right? Or many conversations. So I was really happy that she asked about this so we could dive in a little deeper. And that's what brought us to today's topic. Hello, Mike and Megan. Thank you for your wonderful podcast and this great episode on discipline. I have 3 daughters aged 10, 9, and 7. They have truly been angels up until my oldest started to hit puberty recently. They never fought. They played together for hours, and they have been so sensitive and kind to one another. We've homeschooled from the beginning. I'm a second-generation homeschooler, so that hadn't been hard for me. My background is in special ed, teaching high school students with severe disabilities using applied behavior analysis, which is ABA. I get the sorry, I'm laughing because there's a cat rubbing against my foot. It's cute though.
Off camera.
I get the basics of behavior management. My struggle is that growing up in a family that was pretty strict with rules and discipline, I didn't fully develop into myself. I think it was just my nature in that environment, as my siblings didn't have the same experience as me. I was such a pleaser, and that was encouraged and rewarded. I was the peacemaker in the family, but I took on everyone else's problems and didn't develop my own mind. So my question about discipline is how you have allowed your children to disagree appropriately and be themselves. How do you let them have feelings of frustration, anger, disagreement, and still maintain discipline? That's such a great question.
We don't.
That's really what we're going to be talking about today. Also, yeah, we don't. How do you refrain from being triggered by their behavior? Give me an aggressive 15-year-old, 200-pound nonverbal kid with autism, and I can do my thing. But my own kids, I get so triggered. And then she did a
Wow, that was a good sound.
Head slap emoji.
You got that right on there.
Yeah. I don't want my kids to learn that some of their emotions are not acceptable. that they can't feel angry or frustrated or that they have to internalize it all. But I also don't want to feel like I'm arguing all day with them to get them to do what I ask, because I think I'm listening to them and they are just trying to get out of what I want them to do.
Mm-hmm.
And then she said, interested in more about this topic. Thanks for being brave and talking about it. Megan. Thank you, Megan.
Did you write that to yourself?
Yeah. This is such a wonderful podcast. I just
there should be more praise in there.
Yeah.
Okay. So
really great question. And we do have a lot to say on it. And we kind of chose a name that seems silly, but I think it's at the heart of it. And we're teaching your kids how to argue with you.
Yeah.
But I think we also included, you just said teaching how to, what did you call it?
I think how to argue.
Yeah. About how to argue, because you also have to know how to do it yourself for it to work in the family. And
both parties,
yes.
need to know that. Okay.
Yeah, and it's something you need to teach your children, but you can't teach it if you don't know how to do it. And so we're going to talk about arguing and why we actually think that's a huge part of parenting. It's like a gift you give your children.
Because that's part of life is working through things and discussing or arguing, you know.
Well, and it and I guess we're going to be diving into this, but arguing requires critical thinking skills, which means that you're really thinking about what you believe and why and being able to back it up and have evidence for it and things along those lines. And so few people today seem to have critical thinking skills. If you spend any time on YouTube and you watch videos where people are debating each other, it feels like maybe part of this new type of parenting where we have this relaxed parenting and a lack of authority in the family. That also means that children were not challenged in the same way.
Right.
Which is unfortunate, because we all need to be challenged. We all need to learn, not that we're wrong, but why we're right, and be able to navigate complex ideas, thinking critically. So
right. And hopefully do it with less, bringing less emotion and, I don't want to say feelings, but because
and understanding the role that your feelings and your emotions play in those sorts of arguments.
Yeah.
So where did this start for us, Mike?
So this, for us, as far as this all started how we operate as a couple, and we learned some of these skills, or whatever you want to call it, information when we were in college, because I was studying marriage, family, and human development as my undergraduate degree. And we just had some principles that we kind of adopted pretty early, and how we should operate as a married couple. And that has sort of bled out into our children. That sounds like a weird thing. that has carried over. Maybe that's the word. Carried over into how we operate with our children, how we communicate with them. So and I don't know if we want to reference the book right now, but a lot of it when how we operate comes from a very one book actually that we still own. This 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work. I don't know if you can see that if you're watching.
From John Gottman.
John M. Gottman, PhD. And he gives some real good direction on how you should handle conflict in a marriage. And it also applies to between
any sort of relationship.
Really, I think any sort of conflict.
Yeah, and we read that when we were babies, really.
Yeah.
Mike and I married when he was 21 and I was 20. And we read this within the first couple years of our marriage, and took for granted that that we probably would not have known this on our own.
That's true.
Yeah, like we just thought like, oh yeah, that makes sense to me. But I don't know if maybe some of these principles you kind of understand intuitively, but I think a lot of the time you don't, especially because you're not really thinking critically a lot of the times in an argument. And so if you could do it beforehand and learn these principles and start to practice them and perfect them.
And recognize when things are going off the rails because you've sort of worked on it ahead of time.
So it's going to seem like we're going all over the place maybe, because we're starting first in marriage, because the Gottman Institute is thriving. It's an amazing resource, and they talk a lot about marriage. But then we're going to bring this down to and how you help your kids when, even though they respect you and you definitely are the authority in the family, how you help them develop their own mind and be able to think critically through their own ideas instead of them just being imposed upon them, like Megan was asking in her message. So in this book, The 7 Principles for Making Marriage Work, Dr. Gottman goes over, he has this research center where they study thousands of marriages. And he is able to predict with like 95% accuracy when a couple will divorce,
Right.
which is sad, just because divorce is a sad topic in general. But the thing that's interesting about it, he said it's not from how they treat each other when they're being loving and kind. It's actually how they argue.
Right.
And which is fascinating. And he goes kind of through, he teaches you about the worst way to argue.
Right. Yeah.
And the things that couples who will divorce do in their arguments so that you can understand how not to argue.
Yeah.
Because arguing is a really important part of any sort of relationship. And we don't mean screaming and yelling. And, obviously we're talking about disagreements and navigating when you have legitimate concerns and disagreements, and how you do that and come to, what's that word?
Solution or compromise.
Yeah.
I mean, and also what he talks about here isn't actually about coming to an agreement. It's just how you act in the moment of the actual argument. The outcome is sort of
that's
not part
it's
of
for
this.
you to figure out, and that's not really what determines.
But it's how you do it, how you get there.
Yeah.
So we could go through some of that right now if you want to.
Yeah, let's go into it. So,
Okay.
Mike, you have it marked, so I'll let you take
I do
over.
have
It
it
looks
marked.
like you were looking at.
I'm gonna.
He's like, I have to study this all the time
need
to
to-
be married to Megan.
No, actually, I need to go back. I need to get back in here.
So
Okay, we had to reset a little bit. So
Mike's hot.
I'm so
This
hot.
is-
We had to turn off the air conditioning because
It was so
it's too loud. The microphones pick it up.
Someday we'll have more of a studio space.
Okay. So again, get this book, 7 Principles of Making Marriage Work. It's good for your marriage, also good for just your relationships in general.
As parents, yeah.
But he goes through how he predicts divorce, and it's basically how people argue. And he goes through like these 4 signs of,
Like you're in trouble.
the 4 bad signs. I think it's 4 at least. Anyways, the first is, he calls it the harsh startup. So that's where essentially when you have some grievance or some issue, you come in pretty hot. You come in angry, you come in super sad or whatever it is, but you're coming in pretty hot. And that starts us off on the wrong foot when it comes to an argument. Now, children may not have the ability to control that as well as an adult does. So in my opinion, if a child comes in that way, this is where I guess triggering can come in. You've got to be careful not to respond in kind and to try to keep things calm if you can.
Yeah, and I think when we talk about triggering, some parents feel like if I'm angry at my kids, I've got problems. I've had friends telling me before when they have young kids, like, I have a rage issue. There's something wrong with me.
Right.
And it's like kind of like, I need help. And it's like, now you may, I'm not saying there's parents out there who don't need some help dealing with their anger issues, but I think it's very natural because you're going from child to now parent where you have to be more in control of your emotions than the person you're dealing with. Second, kids are really good at pushing buttons. Humans are really good at pushing buttons.
Right.
Kids just haven't learned not to push those buttons as much. And then third, you're actually supposed to be frustrated at your kids to teach them because they're not behaving appropriately.
Right. Yep.
And so you just have to learn not to come in too hot. And I
Right.
think you're right. They're going to come in hot. And to teach them maybe
A lot of times they will not.
Yeah.
I mean, not always, but
but teaching them to slow down, to like take a deep breath and then have your conversation. But
Right.
for yourself, there's been many a time when children have come in hot into a conversation and my brain has like explosions going off of inside of it. And my face stays very calm.
Yeah.
And
you gotta keep the water still on the top, even though it's kind of
there's
turbulent
other
underneath.
times when that doesn't happen at all. I'm like, excuse me, what did you just say? When
They can attest to that.
when I know I have 2 kids standing right here.
They're right behind us.
When I do it right, I often utter a little prayer internally too, because I'm like, here we go. I gotta stay in the wise zone and see this for what it is.
Highway to the Wise Zone. That's a new song.
Highway to the wise zone.
That's a good one.
But like I got to stay in this place, and so I have to like put my feelings over here, and like stay afloat. Don't let it like puncture my boat, and then I just like go down,
Right.
capsize. So
And then, if we can probably talk a little bit about also marriage, because that's what this is about. Another way that you can avoid coming in hot, what we've learned, or what they call a harsh startup, is thinking about the thing that you're wanting to complain about or bring up with your significant other, taking some time to consider maybe the validity of your feelings on that, and trying to see it from the other person's perspective. So pausing and maybe taking not even just like a few minutes, but possibly hours. I think we've both done that before, where you wait, you think about it, you think, am I right on this? Am I really accurate on how I'm perceiving the situation or whatever it is? And that can help you then, when you do want to bring it up, to have a more measured approach.
Yes, because feelings aren't facts.
Right.
And that I know we talk about this a lot, like, trust your feelings, Luke. It's like, absolutely don't.
Don't trust your
feelings. Your feelings are wrong all the time. They could be chemically, altered by how much sleep you've had or where your hormones are at or how much food you've had. Like, you need to question your feelings. You need to doubt your doubts and your fears and all of those things. And so one of the tools my brother has taught us, I don't remember what he calls it, but like that you ask yourself, can I prove this in a court of law?
Yeah, the thing
is this based in fact?
Right.
And so if it's, you're thinking, oh, Mike never does this thing. It's like, is that true that he never does this thing? Or, and then like, okay, do I do that thing?
Yeah.
You're giving yourself a little bit of time, and there's still very valid things that need to come up and be discussed in marriage.
Sure.
But can you approach it a little differently? And they probably talk about like coming in hot beginnings.
They talk about don't use always and never.
Yeah.
When you're going to complain about something, nothing is ever always and never.
Nothing.
Nothing is never always.
It's never always or never. That you'll always find that there was always a time. No, sorry, I was going to keep going with that. But no, we did this since early in our marriage, and so sometimes we wanted to say it so much that I would say things like, I know this probably isn't accurate, but it feels like you never do this.
Right.
Or it feels like you always do this. And I would so you understood. And I would even say, I know I could be wrong on this, but it really feels like.
Right. Yeah.
And then it gives you the space to not get as defensive, because it's so naturally defensive. And every conversation like this is going to be a little uncomfortable at first, because you catch people off guard, and everybody's like wants to protect themselves. And so the emotions are going to rise a little bit.
Yeah, it's going to happen. And we're still working on this. We've been married 22 years now. So this is not like, doesn't happen overnight.
Yeah. And so like you have to be willing for it to be like, to know like, okay, we're going to be warmer, maybe not hot. Mm-hmm. We're not going to come in hot, but it is going to be warmer at the beginning.
Yeah.
Whether it's with your kids or not. And then as you keep talking, and you avoid words like always and never, and
critical word, like being critical of the other person,
to accusatory.
Yeah. And contempt. That's also when you want to stay away from, where you're not showing respect for the other person.
Like you're disgusted with them.
Yeah.
Disgusted with their behavior. In fact, I remember once before I'd had any children, I was working at a family camp, and there was a child there with their mom, and their mom was very frustrated at how their child was acting. Totally legitimately, probably. I don't know what the situation was, but I saw this moment that she pulled her daughter aside, who was probably 8 or so, and said, "You disgust me." And I
you're like, I gotta remember that. That's a good one. Good line.
It hurt so much. I had never heard a parent utter that to a child. And it broke my heart. And I remember thinking, I will never say that. And I'm not saying they were on vacation. They're at this family camp around all the extended family members, because this camp kind of brought together like whole groups of families, like the cousins and aunts and uncles. And I can't even imagine the heightened emotion when everybody's there. Or I can, because I've done those. There's a lot of baggage that comes. So I'm gonna give this mom some grace, but also contempt with your spouse and contempt with your children is an incredibly heavy burden you place on them. And so really staying away from very pointed things, especially about their character, who they are as a person. And we've talked about that before, like no name calling. We talked about that, in fact, last week's podcast. So that's kind of like, instead of contempt, there's respect.
Right.
And respect for them as a person and as a good human, mm-hmm. who maybe is a little out of line. Or with your spouse, it's a good human who maybe doesn't understand the implications of the thing that they're doing or not doing or said or whatever.
Right.
And so the conversation isn't to say you're a bad person, but to say like, hey, I don't know if you realize, but like, this is how this makes me feel.
Yeah. All right. Next on here. The second sign is the 4 horsemen. So this sign is actually broken up into 4 pieces. So it's kind of I thought he was kind of tricking us here.
Because it really should be the 7.
Yeah, there really should be 7 principles. But okay, so the first one we actually kind of already hit on, which is criticism. So, if you're instantly criticizing, that's a harsh startup. So that's, again, the you always and you never, that was in this part. So we jumped ahead a little bit.
You disgust me.
We got to be careful.
I'm going to use as many of these negative principles as possible throughout this conversation.
You're going to show what not to do. And we've already had this one too. Horseman number 2, contempt. So it arises from a sense of superiority over one's partner.
He has an example there. Can you give it?
It is a form of disrespect.
Wow, I am so smart.
You are smart. You already got a hit. Which I don't remember the example you're talking about.
That was an assumptive close right there.
There are some examples, but we don't want to just read this unless you want me to.
Well, I just think people listening have, you're taking for granted that they understand what this means.
Oh, okay.
So what is contempt?
I don't know. Contempt is a pretty easy one. It's a lack of respect for the other person, and you seeing yourself as better or smarter.
Okay. Yeah.
Than
So
them
they
in some
talked about
way.
like a husband, and here's what he says that is full of contempt.
Okay. Contemptive husband.
He
Here we
says he's trying to discuss their views about how they spend their money.
Okay.
So everybody's temperature just rose a little bit. That's listening to this podcast. Like,
Yeah,
oh no,
money.
because this is a hard one. He says, just look at the difference in our vehicles and our clothes. Oh man, I hate this guy already. I think that says a lot for who we are and what we value. I mean, you tease me about washing my truck and you go and pay to have somebody wash your car. We're paying through the nose for your car and you can't be bothered to wash it. I think that's outrageous. I think that's probably the most spoiled thing that you do.
Ooh.
Oh my gosh.
If there are people watching, they'd be like, oh.
Yeah, I know. It's so they said he's not just pointing out that they spend their
And
money.
these are actually real arguments,
Yes,
by the way.
these are real arguments.
People come in like these like little lab scenarios. It's kind of weird. They set up like a little house that then they watch them for like 2 or 3 days. It's really interesting.
Yeah, and so they said he's not merely pointing out that they spend their money differently. He is accusing his wife of a moral deficiency of
Right.
being spoiled.
Okay.
And so then she kind of says like, well, it's hard for me to wash my car by myself, like physically. And he dismisses that and continues to take the high moral ground by saying, well, I take care of my truck because if I take care of it, it'll last longer. I don't come from the mentality of, oh, just go out and buy a new one that you seem to.
Oh man.
Oh my gosh,
Okay.
this just keeps going.
Yeah.
This is
Don't-
making me blush.
Yeah. So
Oh my gosh.
obviously that's what not to do. And either
But that's
with your
exactly the same way with your kids.
right. I was gonna say your kids are the same way. You can't treat them that way
You have to assume that
unless
everybody,
they really deserve it. Then
No.
you can.
unless they are spoiled. No, if they are spoiled, it's your fault. But I think it's recognizing that everybody is trying to be a good human and is a good human. And that it's important to give them the space to stay a good human in your conversation. And instead maybe try to like, look, can you help me understand why, like if money's tight, like why? So I wash my car
Right.
because that saves us money. What do you think about washing the car? That's probably how I would phrase it. Like
Yeah.
in your mind, you're thinking because you are spoiled, maybe you're thinking that, but like, so one of the things I do to save money is this. Why don't you think that's important?
Well, and I don't know if that's, and to me, it's more like we both spend money. Okay. We both do that. So let's talk about maybe there's some ways we can
Yeah, I think
save some
if
money.
you wanted to point out something specific, that would be the difference in how you do it and leaving a space for them
Yeah.
to have, you're not a moral superior to them, but like I do it differently and tell me why that's, you don't see it that way,
Right.
you know? And that's going to be with your kids too. Like instead of like, you're so lazy,
Right.
because you never do your homework, or like I asked you to clean your room, you didn't do it. You're so lazy. And I hear parents calling their kids names like that, even in jest.
We can do that.
And even in jest, it's contemptuous
Right.
to say like, my kids are so lazy, you know. That's not appropriate because you are therefore their superior and they're inferior. It's just like, and so how can you say like, guys, like, can we talk about why it's so important for you to do these things? Like where this leads if we don't do it, and how it's hard for everybody else if you don't do your chore. Because now when we come to make the next meal, the counters are gross and it's hard to do. Like, that's maybe recognizing like you may not understand this because, so I get it. Maybe I need to explain this a little bit better. Maybe you haven't thought about this or considered these things, instead of you're so lazy.
Yeah.
So we're going to bring this all back to Megan's question in just a little bit.
Okay. So next is defensiveness, which is that's very common, and I do it all the time. You immediately want to defend yourself, and things can get more contentious that way. So, and what we even saw today, some of our kids arguing that you immediately, when someone's complaining about something about you, you're immediately looking for a way that they've done something bad. You want to switch it around and make it about them or about something they did, rather than what what they're saying about you. Yeah, because like
I think it's always valid that somebody has a complaint about something that's going on. And so in your mind, you're like, well, I don't think you can bring that up because I remember that you did something wrong. And it's like, that's not really helpful. That's defensiveness, instead of it saying, okay, you're right, I do that, and let's talk through that. And you did not start the conversation with the complaint, so you're gonna have to wait for another time to bring up that other complaint, because otherwise it's just defensiveness.
Well, and you just go in circles.
Yeah, and then so it's like, I think if you come and say, you're right, I didn't even think about you when I did that, or if your kids are like, you didn't do this and that wasn't fair, it's like, actually you're right, that probably wasn't fair.
Right.
And so you think about that for just a minute, and then have that sort of conversation.
But avoiding defensiveness, if you can avoid it in yourself, then it can help the whole situation. But
or even soften it. Yeah. Like, even if you're like, I know I'm being a little defensive here.
Acknowledge it a little
bit and try to soften it and try to work through it, and letting the other person work through their defensiveness, because you caught them off guard.
Right.
You really did. Like, your kids are going to be so defensive. And there's definitely, a way to have a conversation with your child where you're bringing up a valid concern. Like, hey, once again, this thing is happening, and I'm frustrated because, you said this wouldn't happen. And they might start defending themselves. And in a way, often in a conversation like that, I'm like, well, anyways.
Right.
I'm not going to pick up on those defenses. Like, well, it's like, okay, yeah, that's cool. But anyways, I really need you to do this thing, and so it's not responding. And that triggering is hard. I think my main answer for the triggering in a conversation like this, because when they get defensive, and sometimes defensiveness gets very mean and contemptuous, as a parent, you just it comes down to practice.
Right.
It comes down to, you can do it, because you're a grown up and you can do hard things. It's practice though. And sometimes they'll catch you off guard and they'll get you on a bad day. And you'll have to apologize later on. Or even as you're doing it, going like, you know what? Obviously, I'm not in a good place for this conversation. You're going to have to let me go to the bathroom, like, as you're like walking to the bathroom and somebody catches you. And then let's talk a little bit later. It's not a good time. And they'll be like, but it's like, listen, it's not going to be a good time for you either, because I'm not in a place to have this conversation. That's a little harder to do with somebody under the age of 10. But it is possible. They may not
let you off the hook.
Yeah, and there's a book called Christ-like Parenting that's all about that, how you respond very calmly to somebody who's using all of these things on you and not getting triggered, because your children will use these things, and you have to lead by example to show them how to not use these sorts of things in an argument.
Not that we stay calm all the time either. We're working on these things too.
It's not wrong to be... I
say that because our kids are watching and they're like, you don't do that.
No, but it's also not wrong to... be frustrated, show emotion some of the time.
Right.
But I think it's not being triggered is the difference. So you don't have to be calm, but you do need to be, sometimes you're frustrated and you want them to understand the seriousness of the situation. As a caveat, a side note, Elijah told me that editing last week's podcast, when I would show my angry voice in the podcast, that is completely inappropriate. He said every time he got anxiety. So I'm doing something right.
Still works. It's still coming through. Okay, so the other horseman, the fourth horseman, we're gonna have to cruise through this a little bit more. We're gonna run out of time. Is stonewalling, which is when basically the silent treatment, and you refuse to engage and refuse to talk anymore in an argument. It's a form of power and of kind of taking control, and it's also completely inappropriate, and it will degrade, or your relationship it'll take its toll on your relationship.
It's a form of emotional abuse. And now this is different than saying, hey,
I need a break.
I need to think about this, and I need some time.
Uh-huh.
And that's different than saying like, no, really, I'm gonna come back to this. I promise. I just need to go for a walk, or whatever. That's different. Stonewalling is where you are actually treating them like they don't exist in a very contemptuous
ignoring
way.
them.
It's silent contempt. It's horrible.
Yeah. And so, as a parent, the way that you can deal with this is not respond emotionally to that sort of behavior, because it is a tactic that kids use. They don't realize that they're doing it. Really, they just
I've never heard of it, but
they just naturally do it sometimes. And so you respond calmly and say, "Okay, I can see that you aren't talking to me anymore." And
so I will be taking your phone.
Yeah, you take the
and your screen or whatever.
And then when you want to talk,
we'll talk. Yeah.
But if you ratchet up your emotion as a response to stonewalling, you're handing the power to the other person.
I think their brain lights up like, wow, I'm in total control here.
Yeah, and they're losing it. So that's sort of working. So you have to stay calm, but still there are going to be consequences for that sort of behavior.
You could say, like,
choose what that is.
I'll give you 10 minutes to, clear your mind. But at that point, if you don't choose to come talk to me, because often they're going to do it when they're getting in trouble and they know they don't have a good argument. And so instead of trying to interact with you critically, like with facts with
an actual argument about why they should have whatever,
they just stonewall you and then they win in their mind. But if you're like, no, talk to me, and like, if you say, okay, I'm going to give you a few minutes. Obviously you're a little overwhelmed, but in 10 minutes or 15 minutes or 30 minutes, whatever it is, you need to come to my room and we're going to talk about this. And if you don't, then here's the consequence.
Right.
So
as a parent, we talked about this last time, you have lots of levers to pull as far as, things you can take away, privileges you can take away. I think a lot of parents are afraid to do that. But you have that. You have a lot of the cards in your hands to be able to have consequences. So you just have to be willing to do it.
And I think the hardest part is not going to the big ones right away, because then you've got nothing.
I know.
So it'd be like, if you don't come talk to me in a few
one.
minutes, you won't have your phone for the rest of the day, or you won't be able to go out with your friends tonight, sort of thing. I know probably every parent has gone way too high. Too hot.
Fast. Yeah, because you respond.
Like, I remember a famous story in my family where my oldest brother was 5 and he had done this thing, and my dad said, oh, it was Halloween day. All right, you're not trick-or-treating. And he didn't trick-or-treat. And I'm sure my dad was like, I probably shouldn't have done that, like, rest of the evening. But then you also feel like, but I can't.
If I go back on that, then I've lost my authority.
Which isn't true. You can come back and say, hey, I thought about that and realized that was wrong what you did. And here, you still need to have consequences, but that was probably a little too far.
Okay, so that's stonewalling. So you shouldn't do it to other people, and that's kind of how you handle it if your kids do it to you. The third sign is flooding. And this is interesting. This is more of I think a husband and wife situation. Because what can happen is if you're complaining or having a criticism or whatever of the other person, they might get overwhelmed and be unable to respond. Like, it's sort of like you're just hitting them and with all this information or with all these complaints, and they are overwhelmed by it, and they can't think straight, and they call that flooding. And it's usually because the other person is being very aggressive and the other person can't withstand that. So you have to be careful if you have if there's something that you're bringing up. So I've never seen this happen with one of our kids before, because I think parents, I don't know, probably don't come in that heavy.
I have heard of it happening to friends from their teenage children.
Okay.
Where they are accusing of parent.
Oh, like the parent is a receiver of the accusation?
They're trying to flood them with accusations of like, you're not fair. My friends do this. You're controlling. You do this. Makes me feel bad. I want to die. Like,
and it's so much.
It's so much that you're just like, oh my gosh, we've had this before where a child will be like, I have never, and you're like,
yeah,
that caught me off guard, and that's pretty heavy and that's pretty high, and all of these accusations where you're like, I didn't even know that this was an issue,
right?
And so not responding, and I think the news does this these days. I think like there's all sorts of like flooding that can happen when you're like, did you know, like these like documentaries that are revealing things and showing you from a new light, like did you know this? Did you know that? Did you know that? You're like, oh my gosh, I don't even know what's true anymore.
Right.
It's
Throws
actually,
you off balance.
the human mind can't do that. And they call it psychological rape, where like you're just hitting people psychologically with so many things that they don't even know which way is up anymore. And then they become very compliant. And this is employed obviously by horrible spouses who are manipulating their spouse. And we might call it gaslighting or things along those lines, where they've just created so many things that the other person doesn't know which way is up anymore. Yeah. But you can get in such a toxic relationship with your child where it's come to the point where your teenager might be doing that to you. And like, or, you know, as they start to get hormones and I think everybody has the ability to do these things to other people.
Yeah.
And so by not responding to that and telling them like, absolutely not, we're not going to have a conversation where you're treating me like that. Then they lose that power, and probably that's not going to happen a lot of times after that. But like in my mind, if a person was flooding me in a conversation, or whether it be a child, a spouse, or anyone else, it's like I'm done.
Right.
Like, yeah. And there might have been some valid concerns in there, but I'm not going to talk to you, and I'm not going to be talked to in this way. If you have some real valid concerns, we need to start over at another time. And you don't have to feel any guilt. They might, and because also oftentimes when somebody's flooding you, they're going to be pushing.
They want you to make a decision.
They're going to be pushing on things that you're kind of afraid of. Okay, yeah. You know, like if you're afraid that, am I being too hard on them, or that, you know, they're going to be pushing on those things. And so you're going to have to resist and be like, you know what? Because they're almost going to be giving you an out. Like, all of these things will go away if you'll just do this thing that I want you to do, or if you'll just see it the way that I want you to see it. And it's like, even with a documentary you might watch or a news program, say, I'm going to have to take a few days to think about that. Because we watched some UFO documentary last year.
Some what? UFO.
And by the end of the night, we're like, oh my gosh.
We're all going to die from aliens.
UFOs, they're real. I never considered this. But then you wake up the next morning, you're like, no. Like, there's another way of seeing that, right? They might be
real, but
like, you're like, wait. There's another way of seeing that. And I think that it's important to recognize that that's like a way that brains work. And so you don't do it on other people, and you can recognize when someone's doing it to you and be like, we're done here. If you want to do this respectfully, we need to start over at another time.
Yeah. So pause. So what you do on that.
Yeah.
Uh-oh. Even Jude just got home.
Uh-oh.
That means it's about to get loud in here, folks.
It's about to... Wait, I want you guys to hear what Eve does every time she gets home.
Okay.
She's coming.
Shh, quiet. I'm going to open the camera or move the microphone this way.
Hi.
All right, she's back.
Every time. Back home.
We're recording something. Why don't you go get changed, okay? I wish we had the camera going the other direction.
Yeah, that was good stuff.
And also, she's going to go up the stairs as loud as she can.
Yes.
Okay, Eve, we can't be too loud, okay? Okay, there's actually more than 4. There's 5, I think.
Okay.
Oh, there's 6. Oh my gosh, there's too many.
You need to go get this book.
7? Maybe there is. The 4th sign is body language, so that's,
if your kid's talking to you and they're going like this, or so if you're only listening, sorry, I have my arms folded and I'm looking, I'm like,
there she goes.
Oh my gosh. Eve, I love it. I understand it. She wants to be the center of attention.
Uh-oh.
And so she will do what it takes to make sure all eyes on her.
They're changing out of their swimsuits, but there's an argument about it. I think that
I've never heard it in such detail.
I think we have to pause for a second. Hang on. All right, we had a little bit of a pause there because it got crazy when Eve and Jude got home. But the last thing we're going to go over on this is body language. So that's when you have to be careful about in your arguments, because sitting with your arms folded and
doing this
closed
face
off, or your expressions.
Or like, mm-hmm. I mean, and we are so attuned to that with our kids. Like, don't you dare roll your eyes at me. And, but I think learning to be as neutral as possible with your body is important, because humans are really good at understanding each other's body language.
Yeah. So be careful about how you're sort of presenting that.
And holding yourself. Yeah.
Right.
So
that's all we're going to go over, but check that book out.
Yeah. how does this come back to Megan's message? And I think there's a few things that I want to pull out of this. So I think the first thing is that it seems apparent that there's a lot of young adults in the country today that have never been challenged and have never had, it seems like they haven't had many healthy arguments.
Right.
Because a healthy argument where your parent is modeling these behaviors for you, you're going to learn from your parents. You're going to copy your parents. And either your parents might be avoiding these sorts of conversations or having them in very unhealthy ways. And so therefore modeling bad behavior, which is so that when people have not learned critical thinking skills, have not learned to say, now, is just because I feel that, does that mean it's true?
Right.
And do I actually think this applies to all in other circumstances? And also, just because I have come to this conclusion doesn't mean that somebody else does. Or if they haven't come to the same conclusion, doesn't mean that their conclusion isn't valid. Mm-hmm. And I think that having these sorts of conversations with your children, though you might feel they're uncomfortable, well, even though they are uncomfortable,
right,
you might feel like maybe they should be avoided. And I've even heard people say, like, I never once heard my parents argue, or like, we never argue in our home. But life requires some conflict.
Yeah, it's going to happen.
Conflicting opinions, conflicting ideas. And I do think you are robbing your children of an important skill if you never have these sorts of arguments with them, where
right,
you can remain semi-calm, but also say, now, can you show me an example where that's happened, or, things along those lines, and help your child learn how to have a critical conversation with some critical thinking skills, and also do it with respect. I mean, we talk about it all the time that respect has disappeared from the public discourse, or civility. We talk about all sorts of ideas. Well, it really starts in the home.
Right.
If I think that if you interact with somebody who is respectful and thoughtful and recognizes that maybe they might not have all the information, or they might need to ask some clarifying conversations before getting upset. In my mind, I often think, well, they've had some healthy relationships at home. Somebody has helped them navigate these sorts of ideas and interactions.
Right.
So in last week's podcast, like I said before, we talked about how we require our children to speak respectfully to us and how we are the ultimate authority in our home. But that doesn't mean that we don't let our children have some dissent among us. And I know some of the ideas, but I think a lot of the times it just kind of comes to us kind of intuitively or naturally. But so I actually invited a veteran podcaster as a guest onto our podcast today. We've never done that before. I don't know if we'll do it much in the future, but I thought they might have an interesting perspective on how we help our children have their own identity and ideas and things, and remaining separate from us, but also having authority and respect. So today we have with us a special guest named Andrew Norp, our 17 going on 18-year-old son. We asked Andrew on because he has been on lots of podcasts, because he has one, and we had one for a short time together, but also because he's at an age where this is, I would think, the heaviest of trying to gain independence from your parents. And so I thought he would have some interesting perspectives. I asked him like an hour ago. I did not coach him whatsoever because I'm letting him be his own man. So I don't know what he's going to say, but I'm actually really excited to hear.
We can edit out anything we don't like, so it's fine.
It's like we cut together like a sentence of Andrew's. He's like, I like my parents very much. Okay, come on in, Andrew.
We have to bring him in. I don't know how we're going to fit on this couch.
Mike's been very nervous about this.
We have to share a microphone. Okay, so Andrew gets his own microphone.
So we'll leave this here and we'll lean in. Does that work?
I get my own microphone.
Yeah. Asher, am I on camera? Asher's our cameraman.
Yeah, Andrew. I mean, you are on camera. Andrew's on like his shoulder.
Okay,
I can move this way a little bit. Come this way, Megan.
This is really loud, you guys.
I know. Well,
how's that?
That's
Don't lean so hard again. Don't touch me. Oh, he's touching me.
that's okay. I can be partial.
Wow, you brought notes.
I have notes written
What?
in permanent marker on notes, like little
Note cards.
These are called
note cards.
note cards.
Note cards. Ooh, the education continues.
Okay. Now I'm
just-
nervous.
Poetry. You calm down.
Are those for today?
Yeah, they are. It's the word poetry.
Like for today's conversation?
Yeah. I always start every piece of notes with the word poetry.
Like what I'm about to write is poetry.
It's like some self-talk or whatever.
Okay, so Andrew, last week we talked about how we require, like, we can definitely do the, like, you have to do it because I said so. And how we are the authority in the home. We are not letting you parent yourself. But I also think that I like to think that we couple that with letting you challenge your ideas, but also letting you challenge our ideas appropriately. But I don't really know how. So this is my lazy way out, really, in inviting you
We
here.
want Andrew to just to like kind of take this
Well, I just know
apart.
you'll see it differently. And also, Andrew is very self-aware, and he thinks a lot about a lot of things. So
I am self-conscious.
yes, conscious of yourself.
Unlike, so just like from my perspective, how do you do both of those things? I've actually wondered about that before, because I kind of think about this a lot, that I feel like out of all my friends, I have the most freedom, but also out of all my friends, I have the most respect for my parents in the way where like
You don't talk back.
I don't talk back. I don't say bad things about my parents. Like my friends are always like, my parents are so bad in all these ways. And I'm like, I don't feel like I should share with you any critiques I have with my parents. I don't know. It doesn't feel healthy.
Because we've actually convinced you, like Kim Jong-un of North Korea, that we
read
can
our mind,
read your mind.
and that you don't poop like Kim Jong-un.
I don't think we've convinced you of that. Not very effectively.
The Beano really helps with
Yeah.
that lie. Yeah. So I'm always weirded out by that myself too. I'm like, man, I feel like I can kind of do whatever I want, but also I feel like I cannot disrespect my parents. Like that's not even an idea which occurs to me.
What about the idea, can you think whatever you want?
Nope. What do you want me to say about that?
No, just that, like, how do we, because we do, I don't, we definitely pull authority on you sometimes.
Yeah,
and
totally.
you know that we're
Talking to
times
this.
when we'll,
Oh, sorry.
Talking to this.
yeah, and there are definitely times when we'll say, you can't do it because, we've had this conversation, ultimately, still, no. Because we're your parents and we say so. We don't actually have to do that very much, but what about, we let you argue with us, but how do we do that and require respect at the same time?
Well, I think you kind of have a. This is kind of far away. Sorry.
Yeah, leave that close.
You kind of do this thing. I feel like where you will earn my respect by like you'll win arguments, and when I'm like, hey, I disagree with this, you will show me via logic why I am wrong. But if I, after you have beaten me with logic, continue to disagree, that's when you like pull out the authority card most of the time. I feel like normally you don't start with the authority card. It's only when I've become unreasonable and started using actually one of those like argument things you talk about, those bad ones, that you pull out the like, because I said so. Normally, I feel like you almost always, unless there's like a time issue, lead with the, here's the logical reason why. Or like if I'm doing something wrong, I feel like most of the time you won't just be like, let Peter come hang out with your friends because I told you so. You actually, I feel like one of your main strategies, you'll lead with a question. You'll be like, why is it right for you to exclude Peter? And I'm like, dang it. I have to explain
So
myself.
I guess what you're
this
saying
is all about
is
winning arguments with your children. What it comes down to.
teaching them how to
destroy
lose
them.
arguments against you. No, I think what you're saying is that Dad and I, though we are the authority in the home, we don't actually remind you of that all the time.
Yeah. Well,
It's been established.
I feel like you are reminding me by logic. It's like you are earning it, right? Like a good leader actually doesn't rule with an iron fist because you don't need to, because you'll listen to them. Like I was thinking about this before, that I think you said we're authorities, though we don't always show it. That is actually a false dichotomy there, where you actually, it doesn't like, this is not this two opposite things that like, oh yeah, we have authority, but we give you freedom. Those are actually like,
Intertwined.
those are intertwined ideas.
Interconnected.
Like, it's not like there's only two sides, like the tyrannical king and the complete anarchy. Like, it's not like you found the healthy middle. It's like almost you are in a whole different area in which you are operating, which is like actually the ideal situation for both. I think I have more freedom because you correctly give me authority, and there is more authority because you correctly give me freedom. Does that make sense?
Yeah, and so what you're saying is when we do take away your freedom, you know logically that was deserved.
Not maybe in the moment. But
Yes. So
eventually.
yeah, eventually. Tell me about times when you actually felt. Did you ever feel? Because I'm okay with this. Because we are not perfect parents.
Yeah, we are.
Got the
That's why we have this
expose being
podcast.
read.
Yes. You know, like where you felt like we weren't letting you be who you are. Has that ever happened? And how was that, you know, how did you push back against that and how did we respond?
Well, I have like a terrible memory of like things which have occurred to me in the past. So
Oh, I thought you were saying I have a terrible memory. I'm going to bring up right now. I'm like,
no,
what have I unleashed?
No,
like
it's like-
I asked for
He
it.
doesn't remember.
Yeah.
I don't know, man. Like I mean, there's totally times when I can remember where I feel like I wasn't heard or my feelings were hurt or whatever. But like also if I've grown up, I've like realized like, well, also it was like 9 o'clock at night and mom had been out in the sun all day and I was the fourth child in that room asking her for something. And so like though maybe I was in the right, I also like can't expect
Timing.
perfect, you know, emotional reactions, right? Like you don't.
Yeah, I think that's also another good thing to teach your kids, right? That like,
Maybe now isn't a good time.
well,
for
that
it.
like people aren't always you do not deserve for people to respond to you perfectly all the time. You can't expect that at least.
Yeah.
And anybody that expects that is unreasonable. If you expect other people to be reasonable all the time, then you are therefore unreasonable. And that there is a time, like, you know, sometimes when emotions are heightened, when Mike and I are like doing the RV stuff, you know, and he's like trying to do all of these things, if he bugged me in that moment, it would be really unreasonable for me to bring that up and expect him to respond reasonably while he's trying to do all of these difficult things. And I think sometimes kids have to learn that too, right? Like now is not a good time. And so I will get frustrated at you. I will see the hurt on your face and be like, listen, I am really tired right now. It is not a good time. So if you want to ask me this, I promise you're not going to get a good response. Or like, I'm sorry that I'm being unreasonable, but you still need to go out because I'm exhausted.
Yeah, yeah. And I think, I mean, I kind of have a joke with this with my friends, which is like, I will probably be able to go to that, but I can't ask now. Like, I will ask in a couple days.
Because
at the
that's
right moment.
respectful.
And I think, but that's not like manipulation. I think that's a completely reasonable approach. Like, this idea will be difficult and stressful to think about for my parents. So I will have to ask them when they have the space and the emotional energy to work it through with me. Like, actually, a recent example is I want to go to a party that is in the day you guys are leaving to something.
Yeah, well, we were all supposed to leave town.
We were all supposed to leave town, but I want to stay and like leave later. And I asked about it and I got a pretty like negative answer. And I'm like, I will wait because I think logically we could make it work. But
Right.
now I don't think my parents want to like stop whatever they're doing and logically work through it with me.
Yeah, and I think on our end.
Yeah.
Oh,
I'm
did
not
you
sure what you're gonna
did
say.
you want to say something?
Can I talk too? Is it okay? Can I have the microphone for just a second? No, I think along those lines is as a parent, sometimes it's okay to say, I don't know about that yet. I need to talk to your mom about that, or we need to figure this out because we did come to a solution on that that was agreeable for both parties, but we had to think about it to figure out what that was. So yeah.
Yeah, I think it's not having a knee-jerk authority response. Like, nope, I don't like that. I need, but to and to have that away from the kids. Sometimes the kids know you guys want us to make that decision right there because you think the pressure will turn in your favor. And sometimes it does, I guess. But it's resisting and saying, I need to think about that. But also, I think I have noticed that we do have differences of personalities in our family. And
Really? We're all the
Whoa.
I
same.
have noticed this.
That is crazy.
I am quite wise. It has come to my attention that not all of my children are the same.
Whoa.
And some of my kids, it is just in their nature to be contrarian. And so I know they're becoming their own person. But I do have kids, and there's a part of you that, gosh, yeah, of course you love it when your kid always says yes to you. But also it's like, well, I don't know if that's very good for them. And so those children, I have some in mind. I do say like, hey, it's not your job to be sweet all the time. And I've said that to them. And like, in fact, I had a child that, I'm going to use an example. Esther just got her permission. I put her, I
signed
did.
it. We signed it, right?
Yeah, I put her under like that same thing I just said. Sometimes the kids will do under pressure, right? No, I just wanted to make sure. I don't think it's that big of a deal, but Esther is like so good at serving and wanting to help people. Like it's her gift. She's a helper, And so like a lot of the times it doesn't even enter into her mind that she disagrees with you. She doesn't want to disagree with you because she wants to help you. And so she wants to agree with you. But I have seen that there have become some gaps in her critical thinking skills because of that. Because she doesn't question us. It's good to question things. It really is. I think, and I hope that you think through our argument and you question it. And I hope that you see why we came to that conclusion. But if they agree too soon, they might not. And so I realized this, I guess this was 6 months ago. And that's another part of how we do this and let people be themselves. We have open, almost debates at the kitchen table, probably like almost every night and throughout the day. We're debating about different topics, but some of our kids are more interested than others. Some people want to be on the debate team and some don't. Esther's definitely on a don't. She listens, and I've been hoping that she's absorbing some of that. And of course she is, but she doesn't actually throw her hat in the ring as often as maybe some of the other kids do. And so 6 months ago, like some loser messaged her pretending to be her friend and kind of walked her through the scenario that they got locked out of their Instagram account. And they were messaging through that Instagram account of her friend. I think. I don't know. The details are sketchy here because it's hard to remember. It happened for her even. It happened so fast. But I'm locked out of my account. Can you help me get back into my account? Because you're my friend, I can do it through your Instagram account. And so all you have to do is change the email address on your account, to my email address. And she didn't really understand, but she's like, oh my gosh, I want to help you. I'm a helper. She didn't use critical thinking skills. And she didn't even say, wait, what now? How will that work for you? She just went and did it. And then unfortunately, that person was then able to request a new password for Esther's Instagram account and take over her Instagram account, which had like 6,500 followers, and then proceed to message all those people pretending to be her with all sorts of nefarious plots, right? That made me realize that probably it's so easy for a parent to think like, well, I'm right. And she just sees that I'm right every time. That's easy to fall into if you have a very compliant child. But I think Megan that emailed us is right, that there are certain personality types that might not get to develop their own ideas because they just want to agree with mom and dad because that pleases them too, to be a pleaser. And so we realized that maybe we needed to do an even better job in helping Esther think critically and not accept ideas at face value. That like, but do you actually think that, right? And that's something you have to develop over time. And some kids come, I mean, gosh, I think we've talked about it before. Like Elijah came built to disagree with us. He loved disagreeing with us, even, from when he was still in diapers. And so that's not something that he has to work on. Mm-hmm. But he has other things that he needs to work on. And then the opposite is true maybe of Esther. And so I do think that some of our kids who are more of a pleaser, we have to be more intentional, and we're always getting better at this. Obviously, we recognized even more so at helping them think critically, which means argue with ideas.
Yeah. Well, and I think just jump in real quick. I think also because we do have lots of discussions about different topics, and sometimes they are more of a debate style, and it's good you can learn how to argue in scenarios that aren't so emotionally charged. That's true. There's not so much at stake. And so, but the same principles apply to when you're having an argument that is more emotionally charged. So you learn how to do that in a scenario that doesn't, no one's really in any danger of losing something they want or don't want, right? So that's probably has something to do with it. Because we do that a lot. I think there's a lot of discussions that happen. And Andrew is kind of the source of a lot of those because he's always interested in ideas and that sort of thing. So
yeah, I was just gonna say I remember I've learned a lot of debate skills from you guys, but I'm kind of naturally contrarian as well, like Elijah. But I think one of the ways I started this, and I knew I got on your nerves eventually, is I'd give you these like theoretical situations, and I still love these. Where I'd be like, would you rather be able to fly or swim underwater? And you'd pick one, and then I'd tell you why it was wrong. Like, no matter what you picked, right? And, like, I didn't even think about it. I'm like, well, she's got to see both sides here, because it can't be an easy answer or it's not a fun question. And I think, actually, situations like that is a really some of my friends don't get it either. Like, why are you always asking this? Like, who cares? Like, it's never going to happen. It's like, that's not the point, actually. It's exploring an idea, and you learn more about yourself, and you learn more about the ideas. And also, it's just kind of like a fun game of mental sparring almost, of like, oh, here are the pros and cons of what you picked and why you're wrong and why maybe it would be better to pick the other thing, you know?
Yeah.
So I think discussions like that can actually be really good to develop debate skills where it literally doesn't matter because that will never happen, you know?
Right.
But like it's a good way to be like, oh, I can see the difference here on both sides.
Yeah, and then I guess when it comes to letting your kids be become their own person within the framework of what you think will also help them be a healthy, safe, happy human, right? You still have rules and things that you'd like to guide them in. I think it's also asking for everybody's ideas and not requiring that everybody comes to the same one. So like some people do want to fly more than they want to swim. Like, oh, I can see where you're coming from on that. And then also making sure that we ask them specifically, because you'll have people that are more natural in those sorts of conversations, in those debates, those lively but friendly debates, asking them specifically, singling them out and saying, well, what do you know, like I'm going to say Jude, he's our youngest. Like, Jude, what do you think? And like, oh, okay. And, you know, he might have his reasons, might be kind of sweet or silly to us, but we try not to laugh. No, we don't laugh. We definitely don't laugh. But like, you know, we try to be like, oh, that's cool. Yeah, I can see that. Even though it might be low on, you know, maybe logical reasons, but he's younger and he's getting better at it. And I do think it's letting that happen too. So I would encourage you to have lively debate in your home. There are actual rules to debate, and those are grounded in critical thinking. And it's called logic. You can actually look up like the rules to logic. There are rules to it. And man, a lot of those rules are gone in today's
public discourse.
In the public discourse, where you could say, is that true? That doesn't follow logic. And because right now, and where the pendulum has swung to feelings are everything, that doesn't matter that it doesn't follow logic because it's what you feel. But society cannot exist on feelings, because somebody could feel literally anything. They could literally feel that anything was true, and it never ends. And so logically, if you think about feelings, you can see that. But you have to teach your children logic. And I think it can be really fun to learn about logical fallacies. Like there's the straw man debate, which Andrew explained that, because I bet you can explain it better than me.
Oh, it's when you explain your opponent's argument in a way which is way weaker than their actual argument. Like, so you can be like, oh, so you're just saying you hate people and that's wrong, right? Or you could make it a little more complex than that, obviously. It happens a lot in like religious discourse where you'll like be like, oh, Orthodox Christians believe this about the Trinity and here's why that's stupid, right? And then like you can just really easily lay out a way simplified, dumb version of their argument that's really easy to knock down, like a straw man.
Yeah.
And it's almost a natural reaction to how you think, because you obviously can't know their entire argument, right? So you might actually be telling the truth that you believe. You believe that's what their argument is, right? And so Jordan Peterson actually talks about this a lot, that it's really helpful before you engage an argument to be like, see if you can describe what they believe to them in a way they'll agree with it. Like, see if you can fully get what they're saying. And that can like get rid of a ton of miscommunication. And like, oh, I was arguing with a whole different side, or oh, we agree, or you sound way more reasonable than I thought. You know, like give them 1,000% a benefit of a doubt that their argument makes sense, and try to make it for them, and see if they can agree with what you're saying.
Yeah. So a straw man in a relationship would be like, oh, I guess. I mean, in a way, that guy who's acting contemptuously. Like, I guess you don't really care about money, and those things aren't important to you, but to me, it's like, wait. She didn't say she didn't care about money because she doesn't wash her own car. And so you're arguing with the idea, or she's like, I guess to you, money doesn't matter. And it's like, no, that's not true. And so there are all sorts of fun ideas. I don't know if you want to bring up any more, Mike or Andrew, of like some fun, like logical fallacies, but these come up in arguments, but they also come up in science and religion and politics. And it's really important to teach your children to be able to recognize those and say, oh, that sounds good, but is it logical? No, it's not. They're using this tactic. And so I can navigate gosh, we have some really complex ideas in our world right now. And you have to be able to give your gift to the children of navigating those. And that starts with requiring logic and critical thinking in your conversations of yourself and of them. But also it's fun. It is really fun to learn about logical fallacies and realize, oh, I'm doing it. Do you have one, Andrew?
Well, there's the one they always bring up, which seems so stupid, but like you actually do all the time, which is the like, oh, all whales are mammals, therefore all mammals are whales, right? And you can totally do that, which is like every time we interact about this thing, you're mean to me, therefore you are always mean to me.
Mhm.
You know, or like you can totally.
Or
You're-
all people who have this idea are members of this political party.
So
Therefore, everybody in this political party
has this idea.
believes these ideas.
Yeah, yeah.
I mean, we hear
Or
that every stinking day.
extremist who has committed this wrong was on this political party, therefore every member of that political party is an extremist.
Yes,
That's one that is pulled all the time
on both sides.
by
Yeah,
both sides, yeah.
yeah, and
What
it's
is that,
hard.
a false.
I don't know the name. I'm not that smart.
Dang
You can
it.
like Google it, and there's like a Google image that has like all of them. There's lots of different. I think it's fun.
Google it.
I drove my mom crazy. She's like, Megan, I don't want to argue. I don't know how many times I heard that, but I was like, I'm not arguing. I was doing the exact same thing Andrew does though. And I see why it drove her crazy. It just like, I'd be like, Mom, what do you think about this? Should she say it? I'd be like, yeah, but don't you think this? And usually I agreed with her. I agreed with her stance, but I also knew there was these ideas lingering out there, and I wanted to hear her response to those because I couldn't figure it out. So I could have worded that differently. I could have been like, I agree with you, but what about people that say this? And so
Yeah, and sometimes it's even like a space where like you want them to win, but because you believe that.
Yeah.
But you don't know how to argue for like, I want you to prove to me that my opinion was right by
Yeah.
me fighting it, you know?
yeah, I think kids are doing that a lot with their parents. Like, I agree with you, but I'm hearing these other ideas, whether it's at school or among my friends or whatever, on podcasts or on YouTube, and they seem kind of valid, but I don't know how to invalidate them. And so I'm going to bring them up with you and be on their side just so that you can, like, I'm going to play devil's advocate with you so that you can convince me even more that this is the right way to live or the right idea to believe. And so I kind of know of those ideas and sometimes will preemptively bring them up because I love to argue. Mike, you don't love to argue so much.
No, I don't.
But I think that's another thing you can do to encourage your children to think and to become themselves is bring up already those other arguments and work through them as a group and in those settings.
Another idea I was thinking about when you told me like an hour ago or whatever that you were going to talk about this was the fact that it is kind of also a false what's it called? Like it's when
Argument?
you're saying like, oh, but if your parents will provide this restrictive, authoritative, structure for you, you can't grow into yourself. I think that's kind of it's not fully what the problem with that idea sometimes is that every structure is that way. Like, like let's say your parents are providing no authoritative structure to you. Their school will, their school friends are still
Their
maybe
peer
there's-
group.
There's no rules, but there are totally rules to social situations. You can't say certain things. You can't act in certain ways. It's uncool to mention certain things. And then you'll just be shaped by that, and you won't be your own person. You'll be the public school person,
Yeah.
or your internet. You'll become the person on this part of the internet. You will be shaped by that. So I think part of a good authoritative parenting is a way that you protect them from those things by giving them this solid source of authority that they can like plead to as this like higher, above all that stupid stuff, but will still allow them to grow in their own way. It's like a protective wall, right? I think that oftentimes giving a structure and real authority allows for you to become more individual than a lack of authority, right? Like,
Yeah,
if-
because then you just become what everybody else becomes
Yeah.
and believes what the group tells you to.
Mhm. Like if we took the extremes, like let's say we have one parent who's like completely controlling of their child, right? And then one parent which is like literally does not acknowledge the child's existence. The child who is not being acknowledged cannot become an individual because every moment is about survival. It's about, I need to get people to like me. I need to get food. I need to whatever, But if you have a safe authority figure who can put you in this safe place, you can really be like, so what do I want to believe? Who do I want to be? What do I want to do with my time? Because you have that safe authority. Just like I think the reason I wrote down the word poetry is because I've been reading this book of poetry from like the 1600s right now, which is poetry from the 1600s. My humble opinion, way better than poetry from today. But regardless, it's like poetry has like a very strict, every poem has a very strict rules to make the poem, right? If it's like an A, B, A, B poem, it's just like each line has to rhyme, every
Right.
other line, which is a pretty strict way to write a story, right? Like a lot of these poems are like entire stories. Like it's like the Jest of Robin Hood, which is like a pretty long story. Second ever story written about Robin Hood is written in an A, B, C, B rhyming style. So like a lot of that story rhymes. You have to write an entire book which rhymes, right? But that actually think makes it a better story because those restrictions allow you to make more interesting things and work in interesting ways. Whereas if it was just like write whatever happens to happen, that's not an interesting structure, right? The hero's journey, which is a really common structure for stories, is a structure, and that's what makes the stories inside of it so interesting, is that they have these walls to push against and this thing to build inside of.
Yeah.
And so I think a healthy family structure with healthy rules actually allows it to grow and be more different and more interesting as an individual than just no.
Yeah, because we talked last week about like tomato cages, and that you might think like, oh, it's cruel to create these cages around our kids or our, but a tomato's fruit will just get eaten up. Like or it'll be pests or fungus or all sorts of things. It's something for it to grow against, to hang on to. And so your parents' authority and their reasoning skills before you have them, because the human brain actually can't fully comprehend these things until later, maybe their late teens or into their 20s. So you are the structure they can hang on to that is reasonable, logical, and authoritative as they grow into their own person. And obviously we talked about how there are some kids, like Megan said she was in her family, that you might have to encourage more to pursue ideas and to question ideas. But I think it'll all come out in the end. And so I think Megan recognizing now that she didn't do that as a kid and is doing that work as an adult, all of us are doing that to some degree with something that we didn't develop at a younger age because of who we were. And then I think I'll end with it's harder to do it this way.
It is and it isn't, but
yeah, it's like you think it means that you have to have your lifestyle. I think sometimes you shy away from it because you haven't questioned your own lifestyle yet. You haven't questioned your own beliefs. And so you have to become a person who believes what they believe because through critical thinking, like that you're willing to look at your own beliefs. You're willing to look at your lifestyle. You're willing to look at your choices critically and logically, and come to conclusions. And some people are afraid of that, especially I think people of faith. People out that don't have a faith often think that all people of faith aren't logical. But many of us have questioned our beliefs thoroughly and continue to all of the time, and come to the conclusion that we would like to be people of faith. And we have real logical reasons that we've arrived there. And so I don't think you need to be afraid that if you question something in your life, that means you are going to tear it down. It is good to question our democracy so that we can see how we got here and why it's important. When we question democracy, we're not tearing it down. When we question our faith, we might actually, and I know we will bolster it. And so you are going to have to be really good at helping your children think critically, have a critical lens in your own life. And I think you'll find a lot of joy in that, because instead you might be ignoring these things. They're like little tiny secret fears of yours that are hidden away. And so you might eat more than you need to because you don't want to feel those or think about those or drink more, or whatever it is. We all have our things that we turn to emotionally to cope. But you will have to do a lot less coping when you bring those things out and actually look at them. And, something that you might have been afraid of, that if you looked at, it would change everything in your life. But it might not be true. Even if you're kind of afraid that you don't have a healthy marriage, you might find, when I think about it critically and logically, that actually we're doing okay. And he talks about that in that book, that everybody thinks like they either have an amazing marriage or a terrible marriage. And he said most people just have average marriages. Just take a look at it and realize logically, people will argue. People have to, have a give and take. And so I'm not going to throw out my marriage and then just go find some perfect human who this never happens with. And so it may seem harder, but I really think your life will be much richer.
Yeah.
And your parenting will be a lot more effective. And then you will give your children the gift of not being easily fooled, of being wise, and of being able to navigate life logically and thoughtfully.
Okay. So I think we'll end it there. Did you have anything else, Andrew? Do you want to talk about?
Checking my notes.
Andrew's got to check his notes.
Yeah, they're all there.
You're good?
I think I hit most of my things.
Sweet.
Well, thanks for joining us today.
Of
Yeah,
course.
thanks, Andrew.
Thank
And
you
I
for
did
having me.
I did the last minute thing on purpose because I am the authority in your life. I didn't
It was
want
a
it
power play.
No, I didn't want it to be a power play. Like in a week, I want you to talk about what amazing parents we are. You know what I mean? I wanted it to be something that you could come to and fairly naturally talk about. But then I also knew that you probably wanted a few minutes to think about it, that you would appreciate
Yes,
that.
I
And
did
so,
write a high theory argument for why authority is important in your personal and societal life and how it actually. Yeah,
You did?
Wow.
I did in my head. You know, not
Yeah.
not for real, but like I had the speech.
Yeah, so I knew I wanted to balance that out. So I did do it last minute, but I really do appreciate it because I know that you're a busy guy.
Yeah,
so.
I got to get back to writing my expose on you guys.
Right.
It's
Making a
important.
lot of
One of
money.
our
It's
jokes
work.
is that Andrew, every time we do something that could be misconstrued is really bad.
Yeah. Anything that could be taken out of context, right? Like in a way that would be terrible. I said putting that in the expose.
You know, like say it out loud, like my mother always, you know,
Mhm,
that
mhm.
sort of thing. So
And I
it is
can't
kind
even
of a
say
joke.
anything
coming.
because they'd be out of context and then it'd sound terrible.
it'd be something like this.
Like I'll say something she'll like find like slightly offensive and that'll happen. I'm like, my mother physically
She didn't like
she
what we
used
said.
physical
She
punishment
would physically, use
to
physical
win
violence.
arguments.
This is dangerous ground
Did
run.
that hurt? I'm
You
sorry.
really
It
got
didn't
him.
actually hurt at all. Shine like the top of the Chrysler building.
Yeah. So
Okay. Well, that's it.
thanks for
So,
joining us. And
thanks
don't
for
forget
joining
to
us.
pre-order the expose. Because Andrew has promised. I told him he can write it as long as he shares the profits
Yeah.
with me.
That's
Yeah,
the plan,
we just need
actually.
some of that money. Thank you.
Well, thanks for coming
Yeah.
along, guys. I know it was a longer one, but I really appreciated Megan reaching out and the others of you who reached out. Please, it helps us understand where you need to hear more and what you'd like to hear more about. And so send those questions along to contact@northandsouth.com. Also, one of you mentioned that you would like to see when we share a book on here.
We'll put it in the. Should we put it in the description of the
Yes,
podcast?
but sometimes people are driving. I think also we'll just start a link over on our website, northandsouth.com, under the podcast where you can see all of the books that we've recommended.
Oh, okay. Great. Okay, that's it.
Talk to you later.
Talk to you next time.
Bye.
Bye.